Is Lorraine Bourke, and as I was putting my notes together, I realised that the title of my talk, Photographic Collections in PRONI, is actually not strictly accurate and a little bit of a misnomer, in that PRONI does hold numerous important standalone collections, photographic collections, but we also have a wealth of photographs from some very unlikely sources, such as departmental files, prison registers, hospital case books, and photographs occurring singly, for example, in family correspondence. So I suppose what we'll be looking at today is a lot broader than just collections, so to speak. We have a holding of photographs from both official sources, so from government departments, and from a wide range of private sources, such as individual photographers, clubs, businesses, family collections, a wide range of sources. And as you'd expect, these photographs cover a wide geographical spread and a wide range of topics. So I'll just give you a sample of some of the photographs that we hold in PRONI today. And as Stephen said, my colleague Joy will then talk about the work of her team, the Reprographics team, in conserving and preserving these photographs and using them to engage audiences in imaginative and creative ways. So starting with some photographs from official sources then, as many of you will know, last year was the 75th anniversary of the Belfast Blitz, and we were, I suppose, inundated with requests from individuals wanting to access and reproduce photographs in our collection relating to the Blitz. The best set of photographs that we have come from the records of the Cabinet Secretariat, which document the impact of the Second World War on Northern Ireland. And among these are a series of really graphic, I suppose, and really striking photographs that document the damage of the Blitz. So, I mean, I suppose when you think of during the course of the Blitz, 56,000 houses destroyed, 1,000 people killed, immense damage to properties and businesses such as Harland and Wolff. And of course, during the attacks, one of the areas focused on was the waterworks on the Antrim Road. And this photograph, just shows some of the damage inflicted on the houses there. And Joy in her talk will mention some of the work that her team has done in relation to these photographs and using them in creative ways. Staying with records from official sources, PRONI holds a fascinating set of records commissioned by the Belfast Corporation and taken by the photographer Alexander Hogg. And these photographs show various properties, mainly older buildings that were demolished or scheduled for improvement schemes by the corporation just before and in the early years of the First World War. But the photographs, when you look at them, they're fascinating in that, yes, absolutely, they document the properties very well, which was Hogg's brief. But you can tell that he approached the brief with his photographer's eye, because he's straight beyond the brief in that the photographs are a wonderful record of just people, especially children at the time. So this set of records, again, would be one that would be heavily utilised by researchers, and we would also be approached on a regular basis to reproduce these images in books and exhibitions, etc. For example, here is the paperback edition of one of Sinead Morrissey's volumes of poetry, which used one of the Hogg photographs. More recently, we were approached by a German heavy metal band who wanted to use one of the photographs for their album cover. So it just shows, it just shows the wide range of uses that photographic and sources in PRONI can be put to, in ways that you would never imagine possible sometimes. Here we are, yes. Moving on then to private collections, privately deposited collections. One of the largest photographic collections we have in PRONI, comprising both photographic prints and glass plate negatives, are the photographs of the commercial photographer, English-born Herbert Cooper, who was based in Strabane, County Tyrone. Herbert Cooper took over a business that had already been in operation and operated by J. Burroughs in Strabane. So some of the earliest photographs in the collection, I suppose, were taken by Burroughs and his team rather than Cooper. The most important of them, or certainly one of the most interesting set, depicts the terrible devastation in the aftermath of the floods in Strabane. So again, Joy and her reprographics team have been doing an awful lot of work with the Cooper collection over the years, digitising a huge amount of the glass plate negatives, ensuring that these important records are preserved. The photographs in the Cooper collection, I suppose, they demonstrate a diverse range of activities, local businesses, and there's a lovely series that depicts and captures, I think, something of the excitement in a small town when the circus came to town. So there's some lovely circus photographs in the collection. This is Buff Bill's acrobatic troupe, not Buffalo Bill. Buff Bill, the man in the background there was William Case. He modelled himself on Buffalo Bill in dress and appearance, but I suppose his acrobatic troupe was sort of like a circus tribute band to the real Buffalo Bill, who toured Britain but never came to Ireland. PRONI also holds another large collection from another commercial photographic studio, the records of the Allyson Photographic Studio in Armagh. The Allysons operated a number of studios in Northern Ireland towards the end of the 19th century, but the hub of the business was based at Armagh. And here we have photographs of the Armagh train disaster, very striking photographs. At the time, it was the worst rail disaster that had occurred on the island of Ireland. 80 people were killed and 260 people were injured. It was all the more devastating, I suppose, in that the train was packed at the time with children who were on a Sunday school expedition to Warrenpoint. So a tremendous tragedy, and captured in a very real and graphic way then in photographs within the Allyson collection. Here we have just an example of one of the many photographs in the Allyson collection. I suppose they mainly focus on Armagh, Down and Louth, but you know, there's such a rich resource in terms of streetscapes, local businesses, local communities, activities, rural life. So here's just one example, J. Miller on Thomas Street in Armagh. Business archives often contain important photographic components, such as the wonderful photographic collection, and I have two examples here which we can look at when the talks are over, such as the photographic records from Shorts Brothers held on indefinite loan in PRONI from Bombardier. And this is, well, there's whole albums. I have one of them here dedicated to the Sterling bomber, which was designed by Shorts and which was the first of the RAF's four-engined bombers. So a very important development, and documented in meticulous detail in the, anyone interested in aviation history will love these photograph albums. You know, if you want to know anything about any component part of an aeroplane or a tank produced by Shorts, well then you will love these. But I suppose as it's not just, it doesn't just focus on the technical side of Shorts' operation, it also focuses very much on the people, which is another strength of this beautiful photographic collection. Here we have workers manufacturing component parts for that very same Sterling bomber. Interesting here, they're all women. So, which just shows the shift which would have happened during the wartime in terms of the upsurge in women workers. Here's another example of workers featuring in the photographic collection. This is from a factory in Menards, and lots of the photographs in the collection were taken for the company's in-house magazine Short Story. So for that reason, there is a real focus on the people, on the personal, not just on what was produced. So a very interesting collection for a number of different reasons. many people wouldn't know that after the war, Shorts diversified and began involved in producing, for example, prefabricated buildings for hospitals and schools, and also began producing a range of domestic appliances. My personal favourite is the mangle. There's a whole album decorated to the mangle. Here you have someone happy at work with the mangle, and then look, you can store it away nice and easily then. Or in the evening you can take it out, fold it down, and the whole family can gather around and play cards. So it's just great, you know. It's bring back the mangle, you know, like we say. PRONI has a number of very important estate collections, as many of you will know, in 2013, PRONI purchased the papers of the Stuart Family, Marquess of Londonderry. These papers had previously been held in PRONI under the terms of an indefinite loan agreement. They were deposited by Lady Mary, the youngest daughter of the 7th Marquess of Londonderry, and his wife, Lady Edith. As I say, we purchased this very, very important collection in 2013, and shortly after the purchase, Lady Rose, who was Lady Mary's daughter, deposited this wonderful photographic collection with us in PRONI on an indefinite loan basis. And the photographs provide a really, really, really beautiful visual complement to those important family papers that we hold. So we're delighted to have them. And today I'd like to welcome Aileen McEwen, who's working with us for a few weeks. Aileen is part of the House and Collections Management team at Mount Stewart, so it's nice to have her here today. So the photographic collection relating to the Marquess of Londonderry is a beautiful collection. It contains a mixture, as you can see there, of formal studio portraits, and also some lovely, just informal family snaps, I suppose, that were taken. So here we have Lady Edith Londonderry, dressed rather splendidly on the left in her uniform of the Women's Legion, which she set up herself. And there she is on the right with her husband and their youngest daughter, Lady Mary, but just in a very informal pose. So the photographic collection is beautiful that way for the mixture that it holds. Obviously, Lord and Lady Londonderry were very well connected. I should say, actually, the photographic collection, it mainly relates to the 7th Marquess and his wife, Lady Edith, and their children. But Joy will talk about, she'll mention some of the early photographs, specifically the earliest photograph in the collection during her talk. So I'll hold back on that for now. But Lord Londonderry, the 7th Marquess, he was Air Minister from 1931 to 35. So the family very well connected. They were at the heart of, I suppose, political circles. They moved in very high echelons. Here we have Ramsay MacDonald, then Prime Minister, just relaxing on the lie-low in Mount Stewart. I suppose from the perspective of Mount Stewart itself, the collection is very important in that it shows a house as it was when it was much loved and lived in. So it's a beautiful record of that. It also, I suppose, is important in that it documents one of the Londonderry's other residences, their magnificent townhouse in Park Lane in London. So here we have, which unfortunately was demolished in 1965. So the photographic records that we have are very important in that, they document the rooms as they were laid out, the furnishings. And so there's that staircase, and there's Lady Londonderry at the top of the staircase. Behind her is Ramsay MacDonald, the then Prime Minister. Behind him, Stanley Baldwin, and with his back to the camera, Lord Londonderry on the stairwell. Lady Londonderry welcoming guests for an eve opening of Parliament party. So, the photographs provide a dazzling record of a house that is no longer, so very important from that point of view. But it's important to note that photographs held in PRONI reflect a range of different realities. and serve as a visual record of the very real challenges faced by many individuals in society. And I've just taken here two, and again, some of the images that I'm showing, I'm able to show them as a result of the work that Joy and her team have done on digitising some very important records that we hold, which have been digitised for preservation reasons, and Joy will talk about that later on. So here we have two patients from the Rancho Hospital, and my colleague Avril Loughlin looked up some additional information about these individuals. We have the hospital casebooks that relate to these, where these photographs feature. And the man on the left is Mr. Ardis Alexander. He entered the asylum at the age of 21, and he remained there until his death 25 years later. Before he entered the asylum, he had been in Kilkeel Workhouse. He had no known relatives, and the reason for being admitted to the asylum was he had epilepsy. Okay, so he stayed there for the rest of his life. On the right is Mr. Richard McCoy, who was a mill worker. He was admitted to the asylum when he was just 18 years of age, after a violent incident. And so, you know, they're very, very poignant, you know, in themselves. And much more information is available in the casebooks. Obviously, due to the sensitive nature of the information, these records have a 100-year closure applied to them. The casebooks where these individuals feature in are open to the public, but the broader collection has that 100-year closure, just if anyone is interested in looking at them in more detail. And here we have some photographs of prisoners from Armagh prison. As you can see, the photographs gives the individual prisoner's name and their date of admission to the prison, the prisoner number. These particular photographs aren't associated with any prison register in that they were loose. They're dated, our prison registers for Armagh prison started in 1935. These photographs were loose, they weren't associated with any particular register, and Joy and her team have done some important work digitising them. But when you look through the registers, people became incarcerated for a range of different reasons, often probably relating to their poverty, you know, stealing very small amounts of food, or even instances of individuals playing football in the street. So again, very poignant records. And that little boy there on the left, as I say, so he was admitted in 1898. We don't have the corresponding casebook, so we don't know why he was imprisoned, but as you can see there, the age of him. So very, very poignant photographs. Moving on then, as well as records of commercial photographers, official records of government, I suppose, and the hospitals. We also have records of amateur photographers, and some of them are of exceptional quality. The lady there on the left is Eva Chick Chester. She was born in Newcastle, County Down in 1872. PRONI holds her papers, her writings, her travel journals. She travelled widely throughout the British Isles and also throughout Europe. She had a very curious mind, and she was a very, very keen amateur photographer. And her photographs are very good quality. There's one of the photographs she took of a postman in Strangford, County Down. He was called Old McCartan. So it looks as if, you know, being a postman at the time he looks quite weather-beaten and worn down, but it's a very striking photograph. So another lovely collection that we hold. Now I'm aware of the time, so I'm just going to very, very quickly mention just a couple other examples of photographs that we hold. We hold any photographs on any topic under the sun that you could possibly think of. We really do. If someone gets in touch and says, as they have recently, we are doing an exhibition on Tahiti, do you have anything? Well, yes, we do. Or if someone was to get in touch and say, you know, I'm looking on something on blues and jazz, well, yes, we have that as well. Very recently we took in papers including a lovely photographic element relating to the Cumber-born jazz and blues singer Ottilie Patterson, featured there on the left. She was best known for her work with the Chris Barber Jazz Band. That's Chris Barber, her husband, looking very cool there on the right. So a lovely photographic component to a collection which we've recently catalogued. And staying on that topic, within months of taking in the Ottilie Patterson papers, we also took in papers relating to Sully Lipstick, the man credited with introducing jazz to Northern Ireland. And within his papers there is a wonderful range of black and white photographs relating to blues and jazz musicians, which, if you're interested, are really lovely to look at. There we have Spike Robinson with Mary Robinson on the right, and you can tell the two of them are probably think it's funny, they're both Robinsons, and there they are. And there's Sully Lipstick in his record shop, which was formerly in Atlantic Avenue. And if you can just see, there's a framed photograph behind him on the wall there. That's a photograph of Ottilie Patterson, who he was very supportive of her in her early career, and that's a photograph of her behind him there in the shop, which I think is very nice. Finally then, just returning back to Buff Bill and his acrobatic troupe. Last year we had a visit from some of the Duffy family, the Duffy Circus family, and Tom Duffy Senior, there in the middle of, I should say, that photograph there of any of you that have been to the PRONI reading room will be familiar with it. It's blown up on the outside of the reading room there. So there is Tom Duffy Senior, who was a grandson of William Case. He was grandson of Buff Bill. And that lady there on the left of the pyramid, that is his mother Lena, who was Buff Bill's daughter. So Tom and his son David and David's wife Stephanie heard about the photograph, and they came to PRONI so they could be photographed out, standing alongside it. As I say, they're a circus family. Tom himself was born in a circus wagon in Limavady in 1929. So there's a real link and connection with that photograph that we hold here. So I always think this shows into focus that when material, when photographs, when papers come into PRONI, they're not just shut away in a box. They're very much there for the public to engage with, and that's what we like to encourage. And it's from that engagement that connections are made that we wouldn't possibly have thought possible. So I think that's just a lovely example. And I'll now hand over to my colleague Joy, who will talk about digitisation of photographs in PRONI and the work that she and her team does in helping people make those connections with what we hold here.
Myself and my team, we digitise records from PRONI. So first of all, just to explain to you why we do this and why we digitise records. So the most obvious reason, I suppose, is for access purposes. Obviously, if you create a nice, good quality digital copy of something, then from that people can print it, or we can send it to other people. We can publish the digitised image on the internet, so it just widens access to it. It meets lots of our organisational objectives, which are meeting our customers' expectations, widening the access to our archives, providing remote access to very popular archives, and improving access to things that might be underutilised or things that might be closed because they're fragile or they're in poor condition. And also then people can do the research at a time that's convenient to them because they don't have to necessarily come into PRONI. So these examples that we have on screen now on the left, it's an example from our ongoing church records digitisation project. This is the earliest example of some records that we digitised recently, and they've just been released to the public to view on site here in PRONI, just upstairs above us in our public search room. This example is from St Colum's Cathedral in Londonderry, and it shows one page from a combined baptism and marriage register. This is from 1642. Now these are very important records for people who are carrying out genealogy and doing family history research. There's a lot of the census or the civil records about civil registration which aren't available for certain periods. These obviously are earlier than civil registration would have taken place. So it's very important for people have access to these, to research their family history. Many of you might be familiar with working upstairs looking at the microfilm copies of church records, so we believe that this is really a great improvement upon those which are quite in poor quality at this stage, a lot of them, so this is an improvement on that. The original records are also there held locally by the churches. They're not deposited here in PRONI, so we're very, very thankful to them for letting us borrow them temporarily to make these digital copies, and then they're sent back to the churches again. So it just makes them available to a much wider audience than they would be otherwise. Another example here in the middle of the screen, Lorraine's also already mentioned to you about the fact that we hold a lot of glass plate negatives in PRONI. So they would have been created in the first half of the previous century, and they're the predecessor of photographic film negatives that a lot of you will be very familiar with. So as you can see here, that is just an as-seen copy of the negative as it looks like. These are closed to the public in PRONI because of obviously their inherent fragility. We don't want them to be broken. That's the unique record of this. And also, of course, we don't want people to hurt themselves, and there's health and safety implications there as well. So what we do is we digitise these, and you can see there on the far right, is the digitised copy, which has been inverted, and my colleagues in the reprographics team are experts in digital restoration techniques and have managed to enhance that image just to make it look as good as it does. And we find that the quality of some of these glass plate negatives are just so superior to some of the more modern photographic techniques that you find. There's a lot of the material that we've digitised that's available through Flickr as well, and this is an example of that. I'll talk to you about that later on. So another reason that we digitise records, and probably for myself and others in the preservation team here in PRONI, the most important one is to support the ongoing preservation of not only the object but the information that it contains, because that's what we're here to do. We've got a clear archive preservation policy, and it includes making copies of the records digitally or in another format to ensure that the originals are retained for the future generations to enjoy. As you can imagine, the originals will be handled less, so they can potentially survive for longer. Also, digitisation, we can enhance the legibility sometimes of very faint or poor quality faded ink, and the clarity of the photographic records can be improved as well after digitisation through digital restoration techniques. Sorry, I was just going to talk a little bit more about this example. Lorraine has shown you already some other examples of this. This again is from one of the old, what would have been known as, it was the Rancho Hospital, formerly known as the Londonderry Lunatic Asylum. That is the actual name that it has on the book, so it's just throughout time, I think our terminology for these things has changed. The image on the left is exactly how the photograph looks in the book if you were to order out that case book in the reading room today. You can see just through environmental conditions it has faded very, very badly, and that's through light and humidity and heat. Also, because this was an official record and because of the type of document that it is, probably very cheap processes of developing and photography would have been used to produce this image, and that's another reason why it has degraded so badly. But on the right there you can see just with the techniques of digital restoration how we can really improve upon how that looks. And we're hoping that one day maybe this 44-year-old farmer from Ballinacross in Londonderry, his descendants might come into PRONI, and this might be the only record left for them to see what he looked like. So it'd be a very exciting revelation for them as well as it has been for us. Before I move on to photographic material specifically, I'd like to bring your attention to just some of the other records that PRONI has digitised. There's a whole series and collections of records which are available on our website. These include wills, street directories, land and property valuation books. Many of these are fully searchable. because they've been indexed by name or street, for example. Others are browse and view. So with photographs, we've put quite a lot of our photographs that we've digitised, we've been able to put up online on the Flickr photo stream, so you're welcome to go and have a look at that. It gives an example of just the vast subject coverage that we've got here, as Lorraine was talking about earlier. If you click on the albums link when you go into Flickr, you can just see the different sets of photographs that we have been digitising and posting up, and every month we try and add more and more to that. And one of those collections Lorraine has already introduced you to is the private photographs of the Stuart family from Mount Stuart. So this is just a favourite of mine, which shows in 1920 Lady Mary was travelling by goat with a goat-drawn carriage. As well as doing a whole big collections of records, we do public and staff copy orders as well up in our reprographics unit. So that's when a member of our staff or a member of the public requests a good high quality copy of an item. The slide gives you a flavour just of some of the different types of orders we've received over the last year. Starting at the top left, so we've got maps. PRONI holds, I would imagine, hundreds of thousands of maps in its archives, so we get lots of orders for these, especially size for size print copies of a map that a member of the public wants an image of where they're from. Also in the last few years we've had a lot of requests for things relating to the First World War and the centenary commemorations of that in a minute. Letters, we've millions of letters, I would say, and this is a really nice example, and I think it would appeal to the perhaps more artistic amongst us here today. This just shows how, when paper was very scarce, the writer would use like a cross-hatching method and rotating the paper. They would write one way across the paper and then rotate it and write the other way, because they only had that one piece of paper and they had so much to say. So it's just, I think it just makes a lovely artistic quality and good to look at. And the last example here, just on the bottom left, is another example from a government file. So that's a more recent image of the conflict, and that's rioting in Londonderry. So as you can imagine, there's an awful lot of digital output from all these orders that we get. So unless the thing that we're copying is a very arbitrary, like a single page from a book or some other very insignificant item, we do like to keep the digital copy. It means that we can support that ongoing preservation by reusing this image again. So the actual digitisation process, it is quite lengthy. Once we actually identify what collection or what item we're going to digitise, there's quite a lot of work that has to go on before we actually photograph it. Also, the selection of the records that we're going to digitise is quite a lengthy process in itself, and a collaborative selection process has to go on before we decide which records we're going to do. So the first thing we'll do once we've decided what it is that's going to be digitised is we will do a condition assessment. We'll have a look at it and decide whether it'll have to go to our archive conservator, Rose Kelly, who's shown in this slide, for some cleaning or some kind of stabilising treatment. For example, we sometimes get things which have been rolled up for many, many decades, perhaps centuries, and she needs to actually get those to be relaxed and flattened using humidity techniques. So there's things like that we have to look into before something can actually go under a camera lens. The next thing that we have to do is, this looks like a lot of information on one slide, you don't actually have to be able to read it, but on the left here is a picture of what our internal catalogue of our collections looks like. So it's just to show you really that every unique item within our collections has its own reference number, and that's the number you'll use upstairs to order the item out to look at in the reading room. Well, anytime we digitise something, we have to name our digital file, and we have to use that same reference number so that we can cross-reference and we know what the image is of at the end of the day, because in 5-10 years' time, when we look at that again, we need to know which collection it comes from and exactly which page it's from. So all that has to go on first. Then we also usually prepare a capture sheet for the photographer, and then that lets them know exactly what they need to digitise, how to name the files and where to save them. So the next thing would be the equipment. Especially important for preservation reasons, you have to choose the right piece of equipment for the job that you're going to do, and that depends on the size, the format and the fragility of the records themselves. So for bound volumes, you shouldn't put them on a flatbed scanner, for example, because if you open the spine 180 degrees, it can do a lot of damage on it, and putting pressure on the spines can damage them. The platen, which is basically just the tabletop part of a scanner or any photographing equipment, it should be big enough for the item. So if you've got a large map that needs to go on a proper map scanner, or a very large volume would need to go on a piece of equipment that's specially for that. We currently have a map scanner, 5 book scanners and various flatbed scanners, but what we use most of all are these, which are specialist overhead mounted camera systems. They're very powerful phase 1 cameras. If anyone is a photographer here who likes to know the detail, they're phase 1 cameras and they've got Schneider lenses. And now these are quite costly machines. The amount would stretch into 5 digits for these actually, so they're much better quality than what you'd get with your smartphone camera or your average digital SLR camera. What we want to do is take the best quality image that we possibly can, so that potentially doesn't have to be photographed again and doesn't have to be handled again and go through that exercise. So we use these especially to digitise things like outsize items or fragile items, unusual formats such as the glass plate negatives, and there's a light box at the front on the table here with some glass plate negatives for you to have a look at the end of the talk. The cameras are mounted on a motorised column, and this can be raised or lowered so that you can get the correct range of focus for it, for the focal depth. And then at the sides there's cold fluorescent side lighting, which isn't harmful to the documents, and they're fitted with diffusers and shutters to make sure that no harm comes to the fragile documents. There's no physical contact between any of this equipment and the document, and again that's for preservation reasons. So after the items have actually been photographed, there's a lot of quality assurance has to go on. We want to make sure that everything has been photographed that needs to be, especially for things like those church records, which are going back to the people who own them. If we have missed a few pages, it's not very good. So we have to make sure that doesn't happen, and also that there's no focusing issues and things aren't over or underexposed. So that's a whole other process that has to be gone through. When it's records that we do keep here in PRONI, we can usually do that by sampling and not having to quality assure every single page. But when it's something that's going back out, we do like to do that quality assurance with everything. We also have triplicate copies of everything. So we take a master copy, which is the as seen item. So if it's a negative, it will be in the negative, as you can see up here. And this is our preservation master, and it's a very high resolution TIFF format file. Then I talked a little bit about digital restoration techniques, and if we have to do anything like that, what we will do is we'll create a copy of that TIFF master and do any of that digital restoration on the copy, and that is also saved, and those two very high resolution files will both be saved in the PRONI digital repository, and that's where we will preserve digital material for future. Then we can also produce whatever sort of access copy we need, depending on what the use of the items to be. If it's to go online, if it's to be emailed, depending on that we can produce what we like. Usually it's JPEGs of a smaller resolution and a smaller file size, they're just a lot more portable. And then you'll appreciate that we've now been digitising things for maybe 10 years or so. So we've been producing hundreds of thousands of digital images, and they're all at the minute sitting on servers. they have to be managed and named appropriately, otherwise you just don't find things again. You know, we get people coming into the office saying, remember that thing you did for me a few weeks ago? Well, I just, you know, can you find it again for us? And if we don't name the things appropriately, and especially giving them that reference number, it's just impossible. So what we do is we add what's called metadata, which is information about information, and we add that by batch processing sometimes using Photoshop Bridge, or more often, because we like to get really detailed metadata, we will just manually enter that into the file properties of each item using Windows Explorer. And you can see here this air raids, the air raids in Belfast, and we've added some metadata in the little properties pane of the file. At the minute I'm working with some colleagues they're here today, Norman and his team in Enterprise Shared Services in the Department of Finance, and they're going to help us with a digital image library so that we can put all these images which have got their metadata associated with them into a system which will be a lot more user-friendly for members of staff to be able to find things again. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit now about some of the very early photography that we've got in the PRONI archive. These are some of our treasures, photographic treasures. The most fascinating, probably the oldest one we've got, is this calotype negative. Now this dates from around 1843. I'm sure some of you will have heard of Henry Fox Talbot, who invented the photographic process of the calotype. It's a calotype negative, and it was a new way where you could actually produce a paper negative, and it could be used multiple times, or to produce multiple salted paper prints. Now before that, it was only positive images that were created, and there were only single images. So this was really the way that was going to see photography through to today. You know, producing a negative and a positive, this dual process. So the way this was achieved was contact printing, and it only required sunlight. It's a very thin and fragile piece of paper that is used for this negative though, so to have one remain and to last this long, you know, from the early 1840s is really something great, so close to that invention of the process. Now where we find this, it wasn't in a photographic collection at all, it was found within the pages of a journal, and it was the journal of Robert Shipboy McAdam, who was the owner of the Belfast Soho Ironworks in Townsend Street in Belfast, and it's just one of our curatorial staff happened to be looking through that collection for some other reason and came across this, and luckily had the expertise and the knowledge to realise what it was, that it was a very early calotype. So it had been used, looks like it's been used as a bookmark, you know, just to mark the page in his journal. So it's quite a faint and grainy image, but you might be able to make out a headland within a lake, and there's some mountains in the background, and there's a ruinous church or a castle or a building in the front there. Well, we put this up on our Facebook page and tried to get the public to help us identify where this is, and someone did, and it's actually Carrick Castle in Argyll in Scotland. So we're trying to do a wee bit more research into that at the minute, just to find out how significant this is, and was it Robert Shipboy McAdam who dabbled in some early photographic processes, or did he have someone in Scotland who did, well, that he was friends with? So I'm going to be looking into that. And then here on the right is a saltpaper print, so this would be the positive that was created from these calotype negatives. And again, this was found in, well, it's more relevant to the collection it was in. It was the collection of an antiquarian called Alexander Johns from Carrickfergus. We know that it's a Celtic High Cross, but we're not sure where it is or the exact date of it, but where we found it and some other contextual evidence tells us that it's probably around 1852, 1853. And then Lorraine was saying earlier about the earliest photographs that we have in the Londonderry papers. This is a very early albumen print. Now this is what came after those saltpaper prints, and it was a big step forward in the photographic process. They used albumen, which you might have heard of because it's it's in the egg white that you find in an egg, and they use that to bind the chemicals within the photograph to the paper. And that became the really dominant way of producing positive photographs from 1855 until 1890. So this is from 1856, so it's really, really close to the inception of this whole process. So obviously, the Londonderrys did know the people to go to when they wanted their photographs taken. They knew who was right in the cutting edge of technology. And this picture depicts members of the North Down Rifles in their uniforms, and it's great. I love especially the little boy at the front with his triangle. So from very old to very new, and what we're doing with some of these pictures from the collections, and some of the innovations we've worked on in the past few years. Some of you might have seen these before because they got quite a lot of press coverage at the time. They're merged photographs, so my colleague who's at the back here, Gareth Montgomery, he selected some pictures from our archives. They're generally about 100 years old, most of these pictures, and what he did was he went to the exact spot where the photographer took the original. We had to take a print of the original image with us to make sure we could line up exactly where they would have been standing, and he took modern day shots, and then using Photoshop he's been able to merge the old and the new together here, and they're quite striking, and they just show you how much places have changed. They were a big hit, as I say, with local press, and they featured in the Belfast Telegraph, and Gareth was interviewed on Radio Ulster's Evening Extra just about the work he did with those. The most recent ones we've done are with some of those Blitz images that Lorraine showed you earlier. That's the one in the top left there. I think that's High Street in Belfast. I'd like to show you this as well, again with the Belfast Blitz photographs from the Cabinet Secretariat War History Collections. We've had a work experience girl in our section recently called Suzanne Shoesmith, and she has a background in animation. And she was very excited to see some of these pictures and said, oh, can I work on these? Can I do something exciting with these? And I'll show you what she came back with, because we'd never really considered this as a possibility with our images, but this is one of them. See if I can show you another one here as well. What she does is she takes the flat 2D image, and she's able to use, again I think it's Photoshop as the software she uses, to create this 3D effect by making different layers of the photograph. And then also she, if you see in this one, there's smoke plumes that move in the background, and flickering lights and this type of thing, and it just really brings the images to life and gives them very eerie realism. See if this one will play. Ooh. Technology. I'll leave it a wee second, it might come up. And lastly then, we're also starting to dabble in producing audio and video interviews. Oral history interviews. So the one that we've done first of all is with a gentleman called Zachary, and he is a local photographer. He's in his 90s now, and he's a real gentleman, and Lorraine and I went out with Gareth and Sam to carry out this oral history video recording with him. He's got a very rich tapestry of experiences and events in his life, both from a general historical and a photographical perspective. The talk tells the story, this little excerpt from his talk tells the story of how he came to take over the Van Buren studio in Belfast, and then just about his experience as a photographer.
What impact do you think digital technology has had on photography then in general, Mr. Zachary?
Well, dare I say it's made it far too easy. Enable people to take masses of photographs, and I don't really know what will be the next 20 years, but I feel that the ease of taking photographs with cameras, with phones, and one is able to now take extremely good quality pictures with phones, and I think that only a minimal number ever arrive on paper, and I wonder if the young people today have thought about what's going to happen in 60, 70 years as technology moves on, and these pictures won't be able to be played or looked at. But that's just an opinion.
So there you go. Maybe this is the right pertinent thought about what will happen to all the digital images. So thank you very much for coming today, and if you've any questions to ask either of us.